says 3, 2, 1, and we should be live. So we will try this all over again. So I apologize, everyone, for being a tad bit tardy. Hopefully, let me see here. Does it stay on a little zoomy dealing? It does. It says we are now streaming live. That's a beautiful little insignia right there. So I apologize, you guys, for being a tad bit tardy. We had some technical difficulties, but welcome to the new era of Zoom world. So I was already telling the story. I'm going to tell it again. So I wanted to share with you why I invited Lyn to join us today. And so I was actually playing words with friends. So, you know, it's one of the things that I do when I'm by myself way too much. And this little ad came on for this conference that was happening in Vacaville, California. I thought, I'm going to go to this thing and see if I can meet anybody who's kind of like me, who thinks outside the box. I didn't know any of the speakers, and I knew of Bethel, and so I knew the music was going to be good. That's the only thing I knew. So I showed up at this event, and there was like all these people, and they're all like, oh, it's so great to meet you. And I'm thinking, okay, so nobody knows anybody, and but they're all like going, oh, it's so great, and they're acting like they're like best friends, but they've never met each other. And I was thinking, well, maybe I'd meet some local people, right? Because in the greater Sacramento area, it's kind of south of Sacramento a little bit. I thought, I'll just kind of meet some people. And everybody that I met that first night was from out of the state. And I'm like, what did I just walk into? It was like the craziest thing, you know? And they're all like, oh, you should join. And I'm like, I don't even know who you are. And I don't know what you're doing. So I'm just gonna hang out here and check it out. And like, oh yeah, you ought to join. And so nonetheless, Lyn happened to be there, and she had a booth with some of her products, and she's an amazing artist. And then she was also doing painting on stage. But when I first went into the auditorium, there was this picture of Jesus smiling on this painting way across the stage. And I was prepping to be the guest speaker at a pastors and spouses retreat, and I was looking for a painting that I had seen years ago of laughing Jesus. So when I walked into the auditorium and I saw that painting, I'm like, oh, that's what I was looking for. So the next day, Lyn got up, or maybe it was that same evening, I don't know. It might have been the next day. Lyn got up on stage, and I realized as a vendor, she was going to give away 2 of her pieces. And I was like so excited. I was so stoked. And I was like uber poor at the time, right? And so I thought, man, I really want to get one of those. So she goes up on stage, and Pedro was like introducing her or whatever. And as soon as he took a breath, I said, I want Jesus. And Lyn turned around and looked at the audience, and I stood up, and I've got this flamboyantly colored thing, and I'm waving my arms going, I want Jesus. And Lyn turned around, she goes, you can have Jesus. I'm like, yes. And so I have that painting, is still out. I keep it on my dining room table. So when I read my Bible in the morning, I pay attention. Yes, that's it. That's it.
Kind of reflective. It's got window on it.
Yeah, I did post a picture of it. I kind of I wrote your name across it and posted it in the group so they could actually see that painting. And then I went to an event. I think it was like in December. Later that and just this last, I think November, December, anywhere. Where we were all in the same thing together. We ended up going on a dinner cruise together, and she ended up at the same table. So I had taken that picture. So I went and talked to her. I take that back. So let me go back. At the event, I went and asked her, I wanted one of those pictures to use at that pastors and spouses retreat event. And I actually gave one of those away during that event. And I used that picture to title my talk, Let's Go Play. And that was Jesus inviting us into a life of play. And so I posted that picture all the entire time I did the seminar. So I went on this dinner cruise, and I wanted to tell Lyn, I'm like, oh my gosh, you can't believe how much that picture impacted all these people. And I was like so excited to tell her, and she stopped me, and she's like, it's not about the art. And I'm like, but you don't understand, it's not about the art. And I'm like, well, what do you, I'm like, did you don't understand? She goes, no, you don't understand. It's not about the art. And I'm like, okay. And I thought, I need to listen to what does this woman have to say? And she went on to tell me, and everybody at the table, this really intriguing insight about how we have been DeGenuisized by our culture and our academic system, and just even our philosophy of living. And it was so intriguing to me. So not only is she an amazingly brilliant woman, but also a very talented woman. she has insights that are just phenomenal. And so I invited her because I just love her as a woman. She's a fantastic woman. I did want to also share too that she did actually, the house that she was renting just completely burned in the fires in the Bay Area. And so she has amazing life experiences, but also hardship, but she has a vision, and so I'm excited. And so I want to give her plenty of opportunity to chat here. Hang on a second here. I want to make sure that we're all up and going. So I want to read your bio, which I may have deleted because I tried to print it out, which wasn't helping my computer. So let me see if I can pull it up here really quick. We will try.
And while you're waiting, I'm going to chatter for a second. And I can't see the Facebook chat. So if one of you guys, I would love to take questions if people have questions. So if somebody has a question, please repeat that to me, because I would love to answer any questions people have as I chatter.
Yeah, I tried to look that up on my phone so that way you'll know as well. So she is Lyn Lasneski, and I had to practice saying that slowly so I get it right. As CEO and fly by the seat of your pants genius at Your Creative Genius. And by the way, there's somebody in this group who was in one of your groups, Nancy, and she said to say hi and that she's been praying for you. Lyn inspires and conspires with divine wisdom to elevate people from every facets of life and to live more creative and vibrant lives. She works with business people, entrepreneurs, and artists to discover and access the lost creativity and genius still hiding within. Lyn is known for captivating her audiences with her personal stories of breakthrough and what it is like to journey into the realms of creative and innovative thinking. Her rich background as a bush pilot in Alaska for 10 years, as a certified flight instructor of Alaska Fairbanks, generates a library of stories that will inspire. She also draws on more than 20 years as a workshop instructor, national award-winning artist, and genius researcher. She shares the secret skills of geniuses that will resonate powerfully as truth, then activates her audiences to access and implement their genius right away, which is so cool. Awakening the creative capacities they didn't know they had. And honestly, and I've seen her do this. She genuinely does this. She teaches and trains, brings healings to hearts and minds, and offers practical tools that audiences are empowered to use on their own personal journey into happier, healthier, and more creative lives. And so, as always, when I bring my guests on, I simply ask them to share their faith story and then what they're doing today. And I don't prescribe what to say or how to say it. However, with Lyn, I did ask her to make sure that she covered some of her genius materials because I know how much impact that it will have on you as you listen. So Lyn, feel free to just take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Elaine. It's always fun to listen to somebody introduce you because we all feel like we're just normal, average people. And I'm really saying this right now, what I'm about to say for everybody, because we all feel like we're normal, average people, or maybe even less. When in truth, we're all amazing people. And the fact that we don't know it actually is an obstacle to our genius coming forth. So it's really cool to, because I'm like, who is she talking about? Anyway, yes, it makes me also think, so I'm just going to talk off the seat of just go with it. And the other thing, there were a couple things that came to mind while you were introducing me. And one of them is, you have recently been through an accident. And of course, I not only had my home here in Oregon burn down, here in California, burned down right outside of Vacaville. But a week and a half later, I had my own piece of property in Oregon where I had a renter. He called to say he was evacuating due to fire. And this is 600 miles away. So how do you get two homes in threat of fire within a week and a half? A whole state away is unbelievable. And one of the keys of getting through that kind of thing is vision. Because when you have a vision and you know what you're called to do, The enemy will throw things left and right at you, and that's actually a sign you're on the right path. And you want to give up. You want to go, okay, now what do I do? Because I lost everything in that home in here in California, which included my computer backups and everything that had to do with the courses that I teach. So that's a huge amount of loss. But what's happened to me is because of my vision to release people into their genuine genius, it's like, it doesn't matter. I am not going to let the enemy stop me. It just doesn't matter. And so what I want to say in that is something Winston Churchill said, which was never, 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 never give up. I don't know if he said it that many times, but I know he said it a lot. And Winston Churchill is actually one of my favorite people to refer to, because he is the one that God used to awaken me to the fact that genius is accessible to all of us. And I have a cat right here, and she's just moving around on me. It's accessible to all of us. And it actually happened in another traumatic moment where when I was living in that home in Oregon, and it was actually under flood stage. And I was really, really sick that night. And I'm going to tell this story short because it's actually the birthplace of the revelation God gave me regarding genius, which I will come back to the story. What comes to my mind is the very thing that needs to be emphasized here is a shifting needs to happen in your mind that you have genuine genius, because if that shifting doesn't happen, you will not access your genius. So my goal today is I hope to shift you enough in your thinking that it could be possible for you. And then when you know it's possible for you, even if you just think it's barely possible, that will open the door for you to step into what's true for you.
And I think that one of the things that was really helpful the first time that you spoke in one of my groups was really helping us understand what genius meant.
Oh,
because
yeah.
we have this mindset that genius is like this unattainable thing that is way out there. And I remember you telling the story of how you discovered what genius really meant.
Yeah. And then I'll talk, in fact, I don't want to lose my train of thought, but that is a really good one. So I will start there right now. So the night I'm telling you about, I started to tell you about is when my home was in flood stage. And I was actually really sick that night as well. And to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. And there was an officer who came to the door to say, I need to evacuate. And I could not get out of bed to answer. And I really thought, I don't even care. God, let the flood take my house away. I'm so done with life. I was sick. I was broke. I was lonely. I was all those things. I was like at the bottom of the barrel. And it's funny because I had a Winston Churchill book beside me on the bed. And that I could reach, but I didn't even have to reach it because I'd read the book many times. And suddenly, and this is how God loves to work, because when you're in a place of, I want to call it receptivity, but it often will feel like a very painful bottom of the barrel. You're actually far more receptive than you can imagine, because you're now in a place of surrender to whatever's going to happen. And surrender is so key. And I was in a place of surrender. And that night I was looking at that Winston Churchill book, and he wrote a book called Painting as a Pastime. And he starts sharing in that book, he shares that in order to do what he did to the level of genius he did, he had to paint. And a lot of people don't even know he was an artist yet. He actually points out that painting pointed to his ability to carry the responsibilities that he had and to have the insights he had. And that began my own journey, because I was like, okay, I'm an artist. And that night, all these puzzle pieces came together. And I'm remembering when I had studied geniuses years before in Alaska, back when I was flight instructing, and I had put myself on my own path of studying art. And I haven't forgot your thing. I'm going to get there with that genius definition. And I put myself on my own path of studying genius unknowingly because I was studying artists. And what I didn't realize at that moment until later, the night of Churchill and the flood, was that geniuses, almost all geniuses throughout history, were artists. And then I began to understand how, like in the case of Churchill, who was an artist, and even we may not like Hitler, but he was a genius. And you know what he went to school for? He got a degree in art. I am not kidding. That was his background. But there's so many geniuses throughout history who were either artists or said the key to their genius and their insight, like Einstein said this and Tesla said this, is visual thinking. But we're not taught visual thinking, and yet that is the preeminent skill in all geniuses throughout history. And that night I heard God say that, Lyn, these things need to be trained to bring out the geniuses. And of course, Wikipedia says only 2% of the people on the planet are geniuses, right? Well, here's your first eye opener. God said to me, does that sound like me to you? That is a scarcity mindset that only 2% of this beautiful, unimaginable, powerful human race, and only 2% get to be geniuses. And I heard God say, no, it's actually the other way around, Lyn. 98% of us were born geniuses. And the problem is our culture has DeGenuisized us. And I'll talk about that more in just a second, but I do want to define now what genius is, because as a result of what happened that night, I dived deep into everything I'd already studied about geniuses and how it came together. But one of the key things is when I looked up genius, so get this, genius was a word from 1490, I believe. I haven't shared this story for a while, but 1490 is when the word genius was birthed. Now, most people think that genius relates to IQ. Well, IQ as a concept didn't happen until 500 years later in 1940. So like there's 500 years there where the word genius existed, but the concept of a high IQ did not. So what did genius mean for 500 years if it wasn't about how smart you are on the IQ range? Well, it's because it actually comes, so for 500 years, the root word of genius comes from the same root word as Genesis. Okay, Genesis is what is our birth, right? And God showed me that genius came from the same root word because genius actually means the gifting or spirit given you at your birth. So every single one of you that are watching this right now, you were gifted a genius at birth. There's no, you can tell me you don't see no sign of it, you don't feel like it. All our senses in the physical world may think you don't have any sign of it. Well, that's a lie of the enemy, because he doesn't even want you to know how powerful that you are. And so the first piece that has to happen is our beliefs. And of course, belief is so big in the kingdom. Okay, you can't even get into the kingdom without believing. But over and over and over again, it says in the word that, for instance, the Israelites couldn't get into the promised land because they didn't believe. There were people in Jesus's time, he was healing people left and right, but they weren't able to be healed if they didn't believe. Yesterday, I was talking with my group about the disciples, and they actually believed had seen Jesus do healing left and right. But now they were praying for a spirit that was in this man's son, and they couldn't remove the spirit. And they went to Jesus. We don't know. I hear they'd already seen Jesus do lots of healing, and they'd actually experienced bringing healing to people as they traveled. But this one event, suddenly it felt like, what are we doing wrong? What are we missing? And he said, it's your unbelief. Now, I thought that was a curious thing to say because they had every reason to believe, right? And so there's this gap that signifies that we can believe, but there also is unbelief. So our job is to know, okay, I'm going to choose to believe that with my conscious mind, but now I've got to do the work of accessing the subconscious mind, which is also where genius comes from. And you know what? I just happen to have my whiteboard here, so I'm going to do a little teaching. Okay, this is my whiteboard. I just used it yesterday, so it's still here. I don't know, it's kind of reflective.
That's okay. I love it when you do this because I remember when you did this before and it was like really super powerful. So,
cool.
Yeah, if you can.
I don't know what I did before, but.
You did the iceberg thing, I think?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Okay.
So I hope you guys can see this drawing, even though it's kind of reflective with the window. Yeah. Can you see that? Maybe I got to lower it because I want to know if you guys can see it.
Yeah, if you can scoot a little bit to your right so that the more of the board is showing. There you go.
Okay. So, yeah, I love the iceberg analogy. God gave it to me 10 years ago, and it hasn't changed a bit. In fact, it's gotten more and more powerful as a metaphor. So I was telling you, your conscious mind, okay, they say the whole metaphor with the iceberg is that we only use 10% of our brain, right? So most people think that's true. Well, actually, it's not true. It's one of the lies of the enemy because neuroscience has found that actually our subconscious mind rules and activates our lives 98% of the time. So in other words, we live out of this part of our brain, not this part of the brain. We think that, so this is our conscious mind up here. This is our subconscious mind down here. And we think we make decisions and our behavior all come out of our conscious thinking. But they actually did studies that showed where they put MRIs, on people's brains, and in the decision-making process, they discovered we all tend to make decisions seconds before in our subconscious before our conscious even knows. Now, our subconscious, that is the seat of our beliefs and our past experiences. It's where our emotions come from. So this all happens down here in our subconscious. Well, we go to school for 12 to 18 years on how to use only this part of our brain. We're taught the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic, which teaches us how to access the part of the brain that actually doesn't determine the success of our lives. This is what determines the success of our lives. And we're not taught any skill development down here. Now, the other interesting thing about the conscious mind is we're taught the 3 R's, and it's very what they call left brain. It's very rational, logical, and verbal thinking brain, okay? It's verbally based. It's very linear. So we say words through sentences, through paragraphs. That's all very verbally based. So this is the part of the brain we're taught to use. Well, this part of the brain is actually visually based. It communicates through a visual language and through images of your past experiences. And our past experiences actually create our beliefs from a very young child. And we think we believe what we do because we rationally came to that conclusion and this is what we believe. That isn't true at all. What happens is our culture affects us our upbringing affects us, and we have actually subconsciously created beliefs that we didn't even know.
And I just want to say that goes so along with everything that I talk about with identity abuse. When our identity is abused, it's subconscious. And so we live out all of this stuff about our identity, and we're not even really consciously aware that we're doing it until somebody stops you and says, hey, do you know where that came from? So
yeah, that is so true. Our identity comes out of here and not here at all. And it's, so that makes me think of two analogies. One of the analogies that I use, and I'm going to apply it to identity as well, is I tell people the reason we set goals, you know, whether it's to be successful in business or to lose weight or whatever, is we set a goal with our conscious mind. And so let's say we set the goal out here that we're going to lose 30 pounds. Well, what happens is we're kind of, you know, making declarations and doing making all this effort to lose our 30 pounds. But what happens, unfortunately, is our subconscious is going, wait a minute, you've never lost weight before. You've tried this before and it didn't work. Your mom told you when you were young that you were overweight. And I mean, all this stuff from our past experiences cause us to believe something else. So which part, you know, your conscious mind working so hard to make an effort versus 98% of your brain going, yeah, but this is what's really true about you. And that's why that identity piece is so true, because we can say, well, I'm going to believe that I'm a child of the King. But a lot of people go, how can I be a child of the King? I'm nothing.
And so I differentiate that between what I know. So like, I thought this is really apropos, you know, all the things that we know versus what we truly believe. And so our conscious mind goes, well, I know I'm supposed to say this and this and this, but I really believe this over here, you know? And so there's that battle when there's so much of your belief does not correlate with what you've been taught, then yeah.
Right. There's so much we have been taught in the church. Well, that becomes the part of our belief system that isn't even accurate, unfortunately. And then when we hear the truth, like recently, as a result of the fires, I had went through this process of realizing God really wants us prosperous. But I was raised to believe, you know, I was raised a Catholic, and I was raised that it was better to be in poverty because it makes your heart closer to God. And so I'm trying hard to make lots of money, but my subconscious mind is going, yeah, but that's going to move you away from God. You know, that's going to make you real arrogant and selfish. And so I had all these beliefs over here that went against my wanting to believe I could make money and be prosperous. Well, that is actually flipped. And it actually just flipped right before I lost everything in this fire, which is amazing because, I mean, I have grieved loss because I'm human, but I have never went back to that fear of I have nothing. I feel like I have the whole world at, you know, right now. I do. And I have far less than most people in property right now in possessions, but I have no fear whatsoever because I know that God is my provider and nobody takes better care of me than Dad. I love that from the training I got. Nobody takes better care of me than Dad. But in order to do that, I had to change my thinking down here. And what happens is the best and easiest and fastest way to change what you believe down here, because we're not taught how do we change our beliefs then? You know, that is the struggle. How do we change what we really believe? Well, one of the things you have to do first is figure out the truth of what you believe, because we think we believe one thing about ourselves. We don't even know what we really believe because it's in the subconscious mind, right? So how do we find out what our limiting beliefs are and what we really truly believe? Like me discovering, wow, I am very poverty minded. I'm very scarcity minded, and I had no idea about that. So what are the ways that we do that? And one of the ways we do that is through what I call a visual process of what is the story you tell yourself? What are the stories we tell ourselves? And these stories, when we go back, will actually begin to awaken the truth of what we really believe. And so most of our stories come from our upbringing. So like my dad, I didn't know I was going to talk about money so much, but like my dad, you know, he said money doesn't grow on trees. And no, you can't have that. And no, you're not smart enough to make enough money. So these were all the stories I told myself. And one of those stories was that I'm not very smart. So here comes God telling me I'm a genius. Lyn, you're a genius. We're all geniuses. We're born geniuses. And I even start teaching it. But guess where my subconscious belief system was? Even though I'm teaching it. And I'm telling you guys that because if God puts something on your heart and it doesn't make sense to you, but you know it's Him, you just go forward and you trust Him to help you to get on the other side of that. Because it's taken me a long time. I couldn't believe genius for everybody else in the world, but I couldn't believe it for me. And I had to learn how to believe it for me.
And I can totally relate to that, because I used to be able to believe love, God's love for everybody else. And I could believe forgiveness for, I'm like, of course He forgives you. Of course He loves you. I mean, I was like, I could believe that deeply for everybody else until that day that I was on my knees, totally done with everything, going, I can't do this without you. And He gave me that revelation. And it wasn't even really super fantastic. It was just the reality. And I received the reality. And so there's that part of being able to go against everything that your body, your history, your family is telling you, and saying, okay, can I choose to believe what God is saying is true and real for me? And just allow yourself to receive that. It was life-changing. Absolutely.
Yeah, and the receiving, Elaine, is so important. And in fact, so I tell people, so the old school 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic trains you on this part of the brain. And what God gave me that night of the flood is what I call the new Emergent 3 R's. And what those are is, the first one is art, but it's not art for the sake of creating beautiful paintings, but it's for the sake of learning to think visually and being able to receive visually what God is speaking to us. Because not only is the subconscious mind, the language of the subconscious mind, visually based, but so is the kingdom language. The kingdom language is primarily visually based. So art is my first R. Now, a lot of people will go, well, Lyn, art does not start with an R. And I say, well, how many of reading, writing, and arithmetic starts with an R? So art is my first R because it steps us into visual thinking, which steps us into being able to access the subconscious mind. And not only access it to see what we believe, but this is where genius is birthed out of. If you, I have a great quote, and I have no clue where it is. And I don't know if you'll be able to find it fast enough, Sharon, but it's a great quote by a guy who wrote on geniuses. And he said, and this isn't the quote exactly, but he said, nothing of amazing genius insight ever came through a rational, logical, linear way. He said it came always in another way. And the geniuses will say that. They go, I don't know, it just seemed to come out of nowhere. Okay. And that is because they knew how to access the subconscious. And so one of my other R's, Elaine, is receptivity. And what are the skills that we can develop in becoming receptive? I love to use the story also in Matthew of the seed and the sower, the parable of the seed and the sower. So I believe genius ideas are floating around profusely as seed in spring. You know, when the wind stirs up and we have all these plants and seeds are just floating through the air. We can't even see them, and they're profuse. They're everywhere. But in that parable, these seeds fall on different ground. They fall in the weeds, they fall in the hard ground, but it's only the receptive ground that you get 30, 60, 90 times. And I believe that's what happens with genius, is there are seeds of genius floating around in the spiritual realm in huge profusion, waiting for receptive soil to receive that seed, because without receptive soil, it will either get choked by weeds or it will just get pecked up by birds, you know, all those stories, all those images in that parable. And by the way, I love the fact that Jesus spoke to us through stories. Again, stories are visual thinking, because by him sharing these stories about the parable and the sower, the parable of the sower and the seed, he knows it's going to access our subconscious mind and speak more clearly to us than if he just starts talking, you know, the way we're taught in school.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, yeah. And Jesus is just an amazing storyteller, and the visualization that he uses in his story. So he doesn't just tell stories, but he uses things that they can really imagine. And even after all these centuries, we can still imagine them and utilize them. So absolutely. And so so I don't know if I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't know if you told the story about where the word genius came from, because you were talking about the gap in time, and there was a story that you told about a guy who had a school.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so, well, where genius actually came from is the gift inner spirit giving you at birth. That's what it was meant and defined as for 500 years. Then IQ happened, and I think that's the stories. So where did IQ come from? The whole IQ test? I think that's the story you might be asking. And many people don't know this, but the IQ test was actually created by a gentleman. I can't think of his name right now, but he was actually related to Charles Darwin, by the way. And his name, God, give me his name. Well, he'll give it to me. But the point in the story is this relative of Charles Darwin, he actually worked in a school system that worked with children who were very slow, okay? And they wanted to categorize these children for teaching reasons, so that these that were these kind of smart, or this level of smart and this level of smart. So he devised this intelligent quotient test for slow children, not for the average person. And he devised this test, and then because he had nothing to measure it by, he measured his own intelligence as 100, so that if anybody was over 100, and I think they say over 120 is genius, you know, that was genius level. And if you were below 100, you were considered slow. So this was created for a children's school system of very slow kids. There's a different word for slow than they use that I can't think of right now. But that's where IQ testing actually came from. And so then people started picking it up, and it actually was not meant for the average culture. And the problem with most IQ tests, and most people are familiar with this, is it only trains you to think in the way we were taught to think. And then unfortunately, one of the reasons genius is not released is because when we entered the school system, so up until we were 5, actually, here's my other story. It's a powerful story. There were 1,200 very special people, and they were given a genius test. Now, how do you test for genius? Well, I'm going to tell you how they test for genius, because it's incredible that they test for genius in a method that they don't even teach you to think. And they tested you using your divergent thinking. Now, most people don't even know what divergent thinking is, so I'm going to tell you in case you don't know. But divergent thinking means being able to come up with lots of solutions to a problem. And they can be even incredibly silly solutions. It doesn't matter. It's about finding lots and lots of solutions. In fact, Disney, when he hires an Imagineer, he throws out the first 100 solutions they come up with because he knows they're going to be a lower caliber. But anyway, these 1,200 special people were given a divergent thinking test. Now, before I finish that, the opposite of divergent thinking is convergent thinking, which means coming together and finding the one right answer. Now, when we go to school, that's what we're taught over and over and over again. Not only are we taught there's only one right answer, but we're also taught that if you don't find the one right answer, you fail. And so we think we're failures based on what we learned in school if we didn't always find the one right answer. But unfortunately, genius is finding lots of right answers. And the reason genius is so rare is our culture has been taught convergent thinking so heavily that the minute we find one answer that works, we stop. And we don't go to the second idea or the 10th idea or the 32nd idea. And it's usually the 32nd idea that will happen to the normal average person who just continues to pursue it. Like Einstein said, you know, he said that how many times he did so, or no, it was Edison with the light bulb. He failed thousands of times, but he kept going. Now, Edison would not be known except that he kept going. He was an average person, just like all of us, but he shows up as a genius because he kept going and he didn't think convergently and stop at the right answer. I want to come back to imagination too, so I hope I have time. But I wanted to finish the story. So these 1,200 people, they're given a divergent thinking test, and 98% hit genius level. Now, how can that be? Out of these 1,200 people, 98% are genius. Well, I'm going to tell you, because what made them special is they were 5-year-olds. And 5-year-olds have not been taught to think convergently. They've been taught to think divergently and use these powerful little imaginations to come up with crazy solutions and ideas. Well, what happened is the researchers followed these 1,200 5-year-olds. And 5 years later, now they're all 10. They've been in school now for 5 years, gave them the exact same test. This time, only 32% hit genius level thinking on the exact same test from 5 years before. Then 5 years, they follow them again. 5 years later, they're averaging 15 years old. This time, it's down to 10%. 10% can't hit genius level thinking on the same test they took 10 years prior. It's unimaginable. The researchers were so blown away. They gathered 220,000 adults, okay, ranging from age 18 to 80 in age. This time, unbelievably, 2% hit genius level, which just happens to be what Wikipedia says is only 2% of us are geniuses. So since we were 5, we've been slowly DeGenuisized by learning to use only our rational, logical, linear brain, to think only convergently, rather than to think visually. And if you want an idea of how powerful the difference is between thinking verbally and visually, just think about a description on how to get from, say, where you are now, wherever that is, to another place. So, let's say you wanted to go to San Francisco to go to a show, and you ask somebody to give you directions. Well, if you write it all out linear form in a paragraph, it's really difficult for us to wrap our brain, and it's very slow thinking on following that paragraph to get to San Francisco and go watch a show. However, if somebody draws you out a map, all of a sudden you can see it. It's very holistic. It's not linear. You can see it all at once. And the map it's really a faster way of thinking. Visual thinking is not only richer and holistic, but it's faster. In fact, there's a book out called Fast and Slow Thinking, which is really interesting. And it talks about how fast visual thinking is, which explains Einstein and Tesla and Da Vinci and all these people. Oh, that's one of the pieces I forgot. The night of the flood, with the Winston Churchill event, when that was over, I was remembering studying Da Vinci, and he had said the secret to his genius was a Latin term, which is sapere videre, and that means to know how to see. And the reason I suddenly put the art and visual thinking together is because when I teach art, that's what I tell people. Anybody can draw. If you can learn to read and write, you can draw better than many fine art enthusiasts in college. And you seriously can. And I know that because I've done it for like 30 years. Absolutely anybody can draw and paint. But the reason we think we can't is, first of all, is we have a belief system that being an artist is a rare gift. Secondly, we're not taught to do art like we're taught to read and write every day for 12 to 13 years. If you had to go to school and learn art, even if you thought you had no talent, which is what happens when we learn to read and write, if you went to school and learned art skills every day for 12 to 18 years, we would all be amazing artists. And in fact, one of my favorite quotes by Einstein is he said, imagination is more powerful than knowledge. So I tell people the new 3 R's I teach is more powerful than knowledge, the old school 3 R's. Not offense, people. I go, you need to learn how to draw and paint more than you need to learn to read and write. And
can you review those 3 R's again?
Yeah, the first one is art, and it's for the sake of visual thinking. Mm-hmm. So when you learn to read and write, you learn to read and write in order to communicate and think verbally and linearly. Therefore, that's all you taught your brain how to do. When you learn art skills, it's not about, talent. It's about learning to think and communicate visually, which is a key talent or skill with geniuses.
So you had 3. You had art, and what were the other 2?
And the other one was receptivity.
Uh-huh.
The reason I tend to be reluctant to share what the 3 R's are.
Oh, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing, because I'm like going, did I miss it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The reason I tend to be reluctant is because if I tell most people you need to learn art in order to become a genius, they'll think I'm just saying that because I'm an artist. They don't understand that it is a key way of thinking.
Right.
And they don't understand that anybody can learn how to do art.
Well, I remember when we were sitting at that at the table that night, and you had that picture, you pulled up the picture of smiling Jesus on your phone, and you flipped it upside down, and you said, do you see this shape right here? Do you see this shape? What shape is that? And we're like, well, it's kind of sort of a triangle. I'm like, do you think you could paint the triangle? And we're like, yeah. And they're like, anybody could do this. And I just remember the simplicity with which you made that statement, that it wasn't.
Well, I'll give a drawing lesson right now then for your people so they can see that it's possible. So here's a little photograph of Jesus. And most people would look at that. Now, I did that as a finger painting, and it was big. It was like I don't remember, 36 by 48. It was a huge painting. And I did it with my fingers. And most people look at that and they're like, how could you possibly do that? Well, what Elaine is saying is I did it upside down. I don't know if this works. Plus, I have a tremor. Is that working?
Yeah, it's okay.
And if you just look at things as shapes, and let's say you just want to copy the eye shape. I don't know if you can see it in that image.
Yeah, like a worm kind of.
Yeah. And most people go, oh yeah, I could just copy that one shape. And then I go, well, what about the shape right next to it? And then after you do that shape, so the reason for turning it upside down is because this is your left brain engaged. The reason people cannot draw is they try to draw with their linear brain, with their verbally based brain. Right. In order to draw, you have to use your visual brain. And when you take an image, so here's my encouragement, if people don't believe me, is get a simple image, like even Jesus, and most people won't think this is simple, but it's actually quite simple. And you flip it upside down. Now the left brain, the conscious verbal brain, it's much harder. It's so used to thinking eyes, nose, mouth. We label, okay? We label things with our conscious brain. We call it an eye, we call it a nose, we call it a mouth. And then what happens is we try to draw that based on our past experiences about those items. This is what an eye should look like. This is what a mouth should look like. And this shoulding and our past experiences, even if we're looking at a live model, we will draw what we know with our conscious brain rather than the actual shape of what our eyes see. Right. So the reason most people can't draw is they're trying to draw with their left brain or their conscious verbal based brain, and they're not trying to draw with their visual brain. By going upside down now instead of thinking eyes, nose, and mouth, what you think about is shape only, right, and value only. And if you forget this is a face and you hide all the parts that help you to label things. So I tell people, hide all the parts so that you can't label what it is. So you see such a little tiny piece of something, and all you have to do is copy that little tiny piece. Good. Now you're thinking only in shape and color. And now drawing becomes super easy. And it actually really does. And what happens?
And I think it's important to know that I know, I mean, I've experienced this before, and I know that trying to paint was always really frustrating to me because I would think this is supposed to look like a rock. Right. Instead of being able to break it down into parts and pieces. So can you, because since we only have just 2 minutes left, can you talk about how you've seen people spiritually progress by allowing this new type of learning to enter into their daily experience?
Oh yeah. Because what happens is when we're in the process of drawing, not only are we seeing more accurately, but it also creates a shift into a different way of thinking. You know, Steve Jobs said we need to think differently. Einstein said you can't fix this thing with the same problem thinking that started the problem. So it's a shift in thinking differently. Well, when you draw or paint, it actually shifts you into thinking differently. And it's a very peaceful place. It's a place where there's no condemnation and judgment and criticism. And when you're in that place, you become very receptive, which leads me to the third R of receptivity. I mean, receptivity can come in lots of different other ways as well in the art forms. It can come through dance, it can come through worship, it can come through music, but all of those things will only shift you into a different way of thinking if you allow it and become very receptive.
Right. Okay, so can you, before we hop off here, can you let them know where they can get a hold of you?
Yes. Oh, Sharon, I don't know if Sharon's still up here. Sharon, if you are, could you, oh, there, she did it already. I don't see her. Thank you, Sharon. Wait, I've lost my camera now.
It's all right. So I will copy that into the chat for this as well.
Facebook group, yeah. And here's what is going to happen if they can register for that. I'm actually going to be doing a prophetic art, a free kind of retreat is in the works, and probably about a month or two. So if you're interested in learning more about what I've been sharing And also, I'm going to do it in a online virtual retreat format. So it will enable people to do that shift, because when you do that shift, and I think this is where I quit answering your question, is it makes us very receptive to the spirit, and our lives change as a result, because now we're living with the Holy Spirit, with the Holy Genius, and we're having ideas and insights, and we're coming from a place of trust and faith and belief. And it's a very powerful place to be.
Absolutely. And I want people to know that that Lyn has spoken in groups for me before, and also that people have participated in her workshops before and have found a lot of peace in there. And it's just a unique way of doing it. And I think to, again, give yourself permission to try something that's unique and different, and just see, because again, to be able to allow yourself that divine, I love the concept of divine imagination, that we were
imagination by God. Talk about imagination.
Yes, I know, but then I've given you way more time than I should, but it's true. And so I, and going through this journey, even myself, of being able to say, all right, I was in a box of denominationalism, and I love my denomination, and I'm not saying anything bad about that, but that was very myopic. This is the route that you take. Yes. And to be able to say, well, I'm going to allow myself to lean into my call, which is distinctly talking about identity abuse. And I talk to people across the country, around the world, about that. And if I stay in the myopic view of what I've been told to do, all these other people would have never heard about it. And so yesterday, I was on this radio station in Arizona, where I got to have a 20-minute spot only on identity abuse during rush hour time on this radio show. And I'm like, if I had stayed in that little track. And so what Lyn offers is a very fun, creative, plus she's very pleasant to work with. She draws that out, and it's visually stimulating as well as just tactile and all of those things, and to give yourself permission to lean into that. So I hope that you will check out the link and see what she has to say. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, I hope that everybody will at least take the free retreat, because I'm going to share a lot of wonderful stuff. And thank you, Elaine, for having me. I'm just really honored for all of you who stuck in here with me, because I do love to talk about my passion. I'm out to change the world and release people into their genius across the world. So I hope.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to figure out some way to get people to watch the replay, like to give people some sort of bennies for taking notes on the replay and turning them into me or something, because what you had to say is so powerful, and it's so true. And so, yeah, anyway. All right, you guys, I love you.
Thank you.
All righty.